Hi there, my name's Tom, back talking about F1 Fantasy, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the mid-priced drivers in the F1 Fantasy game and who are the best picks out of them. So we're going to go through who I consider to be the most sort of middle of the range drivers in terms of price, and then pick out who I think are the best for the 2023 season. So as you can see, we're starting with Lando Norris. At the end of last season he finished on 14.7 million, which is quite reasonable. I'm kind of surprised he actually dropped down in price. Actually, he did really well considering he wasn't part of the big three teams of last year. Scored a total of 398 points, which is pretty respectable. Points per race of 18, which is actually really good. Going into 2023, I think he could be the best turbo driver option. He's very, very, very likely to be under 20 million, whereas all the Ferrari drivers, Red Bull and Mercedes, are all going to be over 20 million. So the fact that he is almost certainly going to be under 20 million makes him my favourite for the turbo driver to start the season, and therefore almost like signed, sealed and delivered in my fantasy team to start the year off. Also interestingly for him, the quali delta you can see there is 1.8, which is very, very good, very accurate. All of last season, if you watched all my videos, I quite often banged on about Lando Norris and how accurate he is going from the practice sessions into qualifying, regardless of whether he's doing well, kind of average or badly. He is always very consistent going from practice to qualifying, so it gives you a really good indication of the McLaren's race pace. And it's the same for Ricciardo last year, so I think it's the McLaren car itself as well as the fact that Lando Norris is very consistent. So that hopefully gives us a good indication of where he's going to qualify in each race. So if he's really bad in Bahrain in the practice sessions, you might anticipate he might not do so well in Bahrain after all, but yeah, we'll see what happens in the testing and everything before we make any judgments on that. The plus minus is purely how many points he's made or lost based on positions gained and lost through the season. So he's actually lost 7 points, which isn't great, but when you consider how well he qualifies, you can see on the right hand side there he's out-qualified Ricciardo in 20 out of 22 races, which is insane. That is so good. It's actually just so good. So the fact that Lando Norris is a very, very, very good driver in terms of qualifying, and he's only lost 7 points in terms of positions lost, that means that where he qualifies he generally sticks to. So that's key in F1 fantasy. You want that reliability and that consistency, and Lando Norris delivers that in absolute bucket loads. Also you can see there 16 races he outscored Ricciardo, so that's a whole heap of points just for beating his teammate. So I think Lando Norris is a great option. And you can see the sort of advantages, disadvantages I put down at the bottom there. Obviously I've already mentioned that he could be the best turbo driver option to at least start the season. I put Rising Star, like he's been around for a few years now in F1, but he's still like world champion material in my opinion. And even though he's in the McLaren, which isn't quite as good as the best cars on the grid, he's just, in my opinion, just such a good driver that you want him in your team. You want that quality and consistency. The negatives, again, he's in the McLaren, so he's not quite in the best car, but for the price he's going to likely come in at, he's probably still the best option. And another negative I've put in there is about he's probably going to have a tougher teammate. And not to be like putting down on Ricciardo, because I do think Ricciardo's a good driver. He just had a bit of a rough time at McLaren. But I think Piastri is a bit of a wonder kid, and we're going to look at him in a minute. So it could be a little bit closer with the teammate battle, so he might not get quite so many points in that regard. But anyway, for me, Lando Norris is just a fantastic pick. So we'll have a look at his teammate, and there he is. The what is he? 10 years old in this photo. Oscar Piastri, the Australian wonder kid, who's one F2, one F3. So he comes with some pedigree, despite not having any actual F1 experience. And these statistics you see on screen are taken from Ricciardo's statistics in 2022, just to give you an idea, because obviously I don't actually have any statistics for Piastri yet. But Ricciardo finished the season at 5.2 million. I anticipate Piastri will definitely be more than that. I don't know exactly what he'll come in at. I'm guessing 9, 10, 11 million maybe. And if he does come in at that sort of price, I think it could be a real steal. Despite the fact that he's got Lando Norris as a teammate, which means he probably won't be getting quite so many of those teammate points. I do think Piastri could hit the ground running, to be honest. Obviously we don't know that for sure, but I just have this hunch that Piastri is gonna do well from the off, and he could offer like quite a nice little sort of cheaper midfield option if you want to take a bit of a risk on him. I feel like he's going to be quite low owned to start the season, because people are going to be like, who the hell is this guy? And Lando Norris is clearly the better McLaren driver. I'll pick him instead. So I feel like Piastri could be quite low owned and could go a little bit under the radar for the first few races. It could be an interesting one to take a bit of a risk on. But yeah, we'll see. Because obviously, I've already stated that I really like and want Lando Norris in my opening team. So do I really want two McLaren drivers in my opening team? Possibly not. So it could be more of a wait and see, watch and wait sort of scenario with Oscar Piastri. But yeah. Yeah, and that's pretty much it on Oscar Piastri, because there's not much else to say about him other than the fact that he is a bit of a wonder kid and he should do well this season, but it's still a bit of a step up going into F1. So yeah, we'll see what happens. Moving on to my old friend from last year, Fernando Alonso. I still have like flashbacks to the purple sector he set in Melbourne, the beginning of last season, and thinking, you go from the oh my god, I remember it was like 6 a.m. or something, and it was like, oh my god, he's gonna get pole. I was just so excited. He was in my fantasy team, and I was just like, oh my god, he's actually gonna do it. And then it switches to the camera shot of him in the wall, and it's just pure devastation and disappointment. But anyway, Fernando Alonso was a bit of a fantasy troll last year. He promised so much. The numbers just didn't back up in the end how good he was driving last year, because he had so much reliability issues and some misfortune, in my opinion. So I think the numbers from 2022 don't quite reflect how strong he was. Points per race, 12 per race. It's still reasonable considering all the bad luck I consider him to have. Overall, 272 points, so again pretty reasonable, and finishing a value of 10.1 million. Now he is moving to Aston Martin this year. He was with the Alpines, which were the clear sort of fourth best team on the grid last year. So he is moving to what I would consider a weaker team. Obviously Aston Martin talking the talk and saying that they're improving. They want to start winning races within the next 2 to 3 years, so that's very promising. But is that actually going to happen? So Fernando Alonso, in my opinion, is probably taking a step back in terms of the performance of the car he's driving. But the Aston Martin did have its strengths last year. Be able to overtake. Didn't qualify particularly well, and then overtook position, got points from overtaking. Whereas Fernando Alonso is a phenomenal qualifier, so I anticipate him to qualify quite well, even if he's in a worse car. So that could actually detract from the strength of the Aston Martin of last year. So we'll see how that plays out. Teammate battle wise, it's pretty even. That can't be right. I think I've done a typo on the race wins for the teammate battle. I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be 9, if I remember correctly. That is not 19. He did not outrace Ocon 19 times. But anyway, yeah, I do think it was quite even between Alonso and Ocon. In my humble opinion, Alonso was a better driver than Ocon last season, despite Ocon actually getting more points. But there you go. But yeah, he's a very experienced driver. And yeah, the negative in there is that he hates me because I'm a fantasy manager and I feel the pain every time something goes wrong. But anyway, let's move on from Fernando Alonso for now. By the way, just like to say, I do think he is still a good option. His teammate for this year is going to be Lance Stroll, coming in at 9 million at the end of last season. I do think I put him in the midfield options. I think he'll be like the cheaper of the midfield options because he doesn't qualify well. So I think the people behind the game will be like, oh, he doesn't qualify well, so he's not going to get many points. But I'm probably doing them a disservice because they probably actually know that he actually is, in my opinion, a very good option as long as the point scoring system is still the same as 2022. Look at the plus minus. I want to draw your attention to the plus minus straight away. The best out of the entire grid for points in regards of overtakes, plus 127. That is head and shoulders miles ahead of everyone. Like compare that to like the Ferraris that were like minus 60. There's almost 200 points difference between Stroll and the Ferraris. That's insane. It's insane. And nearly all the points he gathered across the season, 249, which is respectable for his price. Yeah, it's really good because Lance Stroll, as we kind of know, he's bad at quali. And I've actually put the fact he's bad at quali as a negative in this video. But the fact he's bad at quali and he has a reliable, fairly consistent race car means he does get those overtake points. So that's why he's hauled in 127 points across 2022. Yeah, so like I said, the Aston Martin is a reliable car. And one of the negatives that for me personally for Lance Stroll is that he's unlikely to break into the top 10, as I've written down there. So yes, he's going to get loads of points probably again for gaining positions, but you're not going to get those big chunky points for breaking into the top 10 and actually scoring actual real life points. So he's quite reliant on those overtake points. So we'll see how, if the Aston Martin suddenly improved in qualifying, then he might not be quite as beneficial as last year, but we'll see how that plays out. Moving on to the Alpines now, we've got Esteban Ocon, who was a very reliable, steady pick. Kind of unexciting in 2022 in my opinion, but also just steady, and if you had him in your team throughout the season, you probably did quite well, I'd imagine. For me, I always kind of leant towards Fernando Alonso, as I've already stated, because Fernando Alonso just always seemed to be the better pick, even though it never quite worked out that way a lot of the time. But yeah, he got the plus 45, so quite a big difference to Alonso, his teammate of last year. So he's gaining those positions as well. Ocon had a few misfortunes in qualifying, from what I remember. So again, he's gaining those positions back with that fast race pace. You can actually see there the races against Alonso last season. He got outraced Alonso 12 times, so that was definitely a typo by me on the last screen. Sorry about that. But yeah, definitely Ocon for me this season. I feel like he's going to be slightly overpriced, if anything. I think he kind of overperformed. His numbers kind of flatter to deceive from last year. I think he's going to be slightly overpriced going into 2023, and I don't think I want him in my team, but we'll see. Obviously it depends on the rest of the team structure. But he's actually, as you can see here as well, got the best points per race after Norris, but again, I say those numbers kind of flatter to deceive a little bit. The Alpine reliability, he got quite lucky last year. He didn't get so many reliability issues. It all fell on Alonso. But I do think the Alpine slightly shaky on the reliability side, so it's a bit worrying about DNFs. He's also hard to predict on qualifying, and you can see his quali delta of 4.1 means, where he comes in the practice sessions doesn't necessarily indicate where he's going to qualify and race, so that's a bit of a tricky one. So Ocon for me at the moment is a no, but I'm still open to the idea of having him in my team. His new teammate this year obviously is Pierre Gasly. Pierre Gasly was with AlphaTauri last season, has moved across. He had a bit of a rubbish season last year, to be honest. Like the season before, he was phenomenal. We consistently saw him in like that P4, P5 position. Like he had no right to be in that position with the car he was driving. But last year in 2022, it didn't quite work for him. He actually had the worst quality delta of the entire grid. So he did like fairly well in practice, and then did a terrible qualifying, or vice versa. He was doing really well in qualifying, in practice. Sorry, yes, he was doing really well in practice, and then did a bad qualifying, so it's just really hard to predict where he's going to be. So that trend could continue, because the Alpines last season were hard to predict, and if Gasly was hard to predict last season and now he's in an Alpine, it could be all over the place. So it's kind of hard to know, especially when he's in a new team. He's going to take a bit of adjustment to get in there. I do think he has that high potential that we've seen, like I've just stated, in 2021. He has that potential to have a really good race and pick up those big points. So Gasly's certainly one on my radar, but not necessarily from the get-go. I'll see how he settles in for the first couple of races, most likely, and see how he gets on there. Yeah, you can see the plus 23, a few qualifying out of position and managing to gain positions and that. So yeah, for me Gasly is a bit more of a watch and wait. Finally, in the midfield options, we have Valtteri Bottas coming in 8.3 towards the end of the season. His price didn't really change much last season. I think he started the season at like 9 or 9.5. Can't remember exactly. So he didn't really change much in value. Points per race was 10. Again, he started the season off really well, and it's sort of tailed off towards the end of the season. Alfa Romeo in overall kind of tailed off towards the end of the season, despite a couple of upgrades. And the problem with Bottas is the Alfa Romeo has the capability of being a really fast car, but it's generally a really fast car over one lap, and then the reliability of the car and the race pace doesn't necessarily always pair up excuse me, to what happens in qualifying. So for me, I think Valtteri Bottas isn't quite there for me, because I don't know, I feel like he can spike those points. He can, like in Bahrain, the very first race of 2022, he spiked the points. He got like a really good score, and I felt really smug about putting him in my team. I'm not sure I want to like rely on that sort of method of scoring points. I would rather have the more consistent method of scoring points rather than hoping for some spikes. And the fact that he does tend to qualify reasonably well for his car, at least at the beginning of the last season especially, means he has the possibility of falling away during the race and therefore losing points. You can see there the plus minus is minus 11, so he lost a few points and fallen away a little bit. Well, not too bad, but a good positive for him is the teammate battle. He really did do a lot better than Guan Yu Zhou last season. 14 qualifying, 14 races, so he definitely outdid his teammate, and I anticipate to be similar again, although Guan Yu Zhou showed some promise last year, so it might not be quite so straightforward. Yeah, so overall, I think out of these midfield picks that I've gone through so far in this video, Lando Norris for me is definitely on my radar. Fernando Alonso, he might still be there, but I'm more interested in Lance Stroll, his teammate, to be honest, as long as he can continue that good form from last season of getting those overtake points. And past that, it's kind of a wait and see. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed the video. Please give it a like, and I'm going to go get a glass of water before I yeah, pass out. Thanks very much for watching, everybody, and catch you soon.